And I would now like to introduce your presenter for today. And as you've seen kind of cycling before the presentation, all the information about Eileen Castell. We are so excited to have you here. As I mentioned, it's such an important topic, and we've had such a great response. And Eileen brings such an amazing background of experience and education to this topic. So it is now my pleasure to go ahead and pass this over to you, Eileen.
Hi, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Happy Caretaker Appreciation Week. I'm really excited and honored to be presenting to you today. There are so many people registered for this webinar from all over the world: Indonesia, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Mexico, Australia, US. So I'm so happy to be talking with you. Animal welfare is a huge passion of mine. I really do want nothing more than support you all in your work. You guys are the heroes on the front lines, making changes and impacting the lives of these beautiful creatures that we are just so lucky enough to share the planet with. So thank you so much for your arduous work and your passionate work that you guys do day in and day out. So today we are going to talk about both compassion fatigue and burnout. We're going to talk more and mostly about compassion fatigue. Most of the information out there on compassion fatigue is really related to the helping professions with humans, like nurses, counselors, police officers. So there is some information out there on veterinarians and animal shelter workers, but there really is very little out there on the work with animals and other capacities such as sanctuaries and rehabilitation facilities. So this webinar is really an attempt to bridge this gap in information. The other thing I also want is to set expectations for this webinar. So we only have about an hour together, so it's really impossible for me to give you anything more than just some basic information and guideposts for you guys to then explore and do more work on your own and then within your organization. I'm happy to assist further if anyone wants to get in touch with me after. You can find me on my website, nextstepcounselingchicago.com, if need be. Only compassionate, empathetic, loving, and caring people suffer from compassion fatigue, the very people who are so vital to the animal care field. So here's an outline of what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about compassion fatigue and burnout, why animal organization and caregivers need to be familiar with compassion fatigue, how one can love what they do and continue to do it even when it can cause emotional pain. We'll talk a quick note on trauma in animals and transspecies psychology, the human-animal bond, a quick note on anthropomorphism, risk factors and reasons for compassion fatigue and burnout, and then compassion fatigue recovery, of course, and then the things that we talk about with the recovery process for compassion fatigue can be applied to burnout as well. So why do we work with animals? Clearly we love animals. We have a deep compassion and care for animals. We understand them as being and not less than. A lot of you have a life, feel like this is a calling and a life purpose, a desire to do something worthwhile with one's life, a desire to give animals a better life and alleviate suffering, enjoyment from working with animals, concern for animal welfare, and a desire to make change in the world and be part of a solution. So it's really this desire to help that can lead people down the road of compassion fatigue. But the compassion satisfaction needs to outweigh the compassion fatigue in order for us to stay happy in this type of a profession. So here's where we need to really define and talk about three different areas. So first, compassion satisfaction is really the pleasure derived from helping. It's feeling good about one's ability to help and make contributions. These are probably the reasons that you first initially went into this field and profession. There is a picture of me with beautiful Asha, the Asian elephant. I was at Wildlife SOS in India. This was one of my favorite moments. And she was just in such a calm place. She was actually getting her feet worked on and cleaned up. And it was a bit of a chaotic environment, actually. There were a lot of people around, but she was very calm. And I was just kind of soothing and talking to her. And she was actually falling asleep during this process. So this to me really represented like my personal compassion satisfaction that I wanted to represent and share in that moment. So moving on, compassion fatigue is a naturally occurring symptom from stress resulting from caring for and helping traumatized or suffering animals or people. This brings about a reduced capacity for empathy, and you may also at times hear compassion fatigue called various traumatization or secondary traumatization. Burnout is a little different. It has some similar symptoms, but burnout starts with a high ambition and occurs from overworking oneself and occupational stress. So some of the similarities between compassion fatigue and burnout. So both are definitely going to impact your personal life and your professional life. So overall, you're going to see this weighing on your life satisfaction in general. The common symptoms for both are emotional, mental, and or physical exhaustion, a reduced sense of personal accomplishment and meaning in work, a decreased interaction with others, so some isolation and depersonalization. This is really where your thoughts and your feelings and even your self-identity just feel not like yourself. It doesn't feel like you. So we're going to look at the differences now, which is really important so that you can better understand and differentiate. So compassion fatigue is very unique to caretakers for the sick, suffering, or traumatized populations. You cannot have compassion fatigue if you are not in a helping profession. Conversely, burnout can happen to anyone in any profession, and you can actually have co-occurring burnout and compassion fatigue. Let me know if it gets too noisy for you. My printer has decided to kick on, so if it's too noisy, just let me know. So compassion fatigue also is not related to any length of service. It can develop very quickly just in one stressful or traumatic event or moment, where burnout is a very slow process that happens over time. And then compassion fatigue can have a quicker recovery time if it's caught early. And then burnout, of course, naturally then has a slower recovery time. So as just a friendly recap, burnout is overworking oneself and includes occupational stress, where compassion fatigue is the cost of caring for others that are in emotional pain. While caring for others can cause stress, the foundational root cause of compassion fatigue is not stress, but caring for others that leads to stress. So hopefully that's clear. So I guess I'd like to take a moment just to talk a little bit about myself actually and my experience. So a few years ago, I was working full-time as a mental health counselor in my private practice when unfortunately my father had passed away without much warning. I experienced a tense amount of compassion fatigue in my work. I wasn't able to care for my clients with the same amount of empathy and compassion as I normally had. I was experiencing apathy, physical exhaustion, and of course, grief. So now actually my compassion fatigue didn't come directly from my clients and caretaking with them in my work. I was actually experiencing grief, which then triggered compassion fatigue relating to my ability to care for my clients. So I also, because of this, began to experience some burnout due to still having to manage and run my business, even though I was fatigued and tired. And, there were also some other stressors going on, like I was having to move. But long story short, essentially is, at one point I thought I might even leave my industry, but I knew enough to give myself enough time to try to recover first before I made any major decisions. And it really took me about 1.5 years to recover from my compassion fatigue and my burnout. So I think that really speaks to how slow this recovery process can be, and that's okay. It happens. So, okay, we went 2 spots forward. So we're going to focus on just here are just the specific symptoms for compassion fatigue. The reason I'm going to focus on compassion fatigue is because you all are in caretaking roles. So you're more likely at risk for compassion fatigue, even though you could also experience some burnout. Okay, so the symptoms for compassion fatigue, I've broken up into 4 categories, into emotional, behavioral, physical, and psychological. So as I'm going through these, you can track if you're experiencing any of these yourselves. Emotional, apathy, moderate to extreme sadness, grief, anxiety, anger, irritability, guilt, helplessness, and loneliness. I won't read through all of these because you guys have the slide in front of you, but some behavioral implications. So just to be thoughtful about withdrawing and isolating too much, and engaging in unhealthy coping. Physical issues, a lot of, we can experience some what we call psychosomatic symptoms, where your emotional wellness actually impacts your physical body in different ways. And then some psychological symptoms are existential despair. So essentially a loss of hope or meaning, changes in identity, worldview, or spirituality. So clearly these personal symptoms impact not just your personal life, but also your work performance in a number of ways. So the organizational symptoms of compassion fatigue, there's a high rate of perhaps employee absenteeism, changes in coworker relationships, increase in conflict among staff, ability for teams to maybe not work as well together, a decrease in task performance, negativity towards management, and even feeling like things may not change within your organization or in your position. So since organizations are made up of individuals, each person is at a different stress point. So therefore, an organization may not be able to function at its best because each individual's well-being really affects how the organization functions as a whole. So compassion fatigue, can be contagious from one caregiver to another. Just for example, if a caregiver reaches out to a coworker or even to an animal to relieve painful feelings, the coworker can absorb some of that person's emotional pain, or you can even absorb some of the emotional pain of the animal you might be working with. So organizations really need to provide education and training in animal trauma and stress, coping with stress and trauma, compassion fatigue, and self-care. So education and training is considered important to increase caregiving quality and efficacy. So I'm going to take a moment. I feel like I've kind of whipped through some stuff. If there's any questions thus far, I'm happy to answer them.
I haven't gotten anything through yet, Eileen, so I think we're okay to keep moving forward. But again, everybody, please feel free to use that chat box if you have any questions. Thanks.
Yes, and hi to the newcomers. I saw a couple people come in. So, okay. So we're going to talk a little bit more about why animal organizations and caretakers both need to be familiar with compassion fatigue. Animal caretakers need to realize that they've chosen an at-risk profession for compassion fatigue. Awareness and knowledge keeps us resilient, and early detection is crucial. Unrecognized or untreated compassion fatigue causes people to leave their jobs in industry, which we do not want you guys to do. And research shows that those who have high levels of empathy, which is the ability to feel another's pain or suffering, are at greater risk of developing compassion fatigue. So pretty much almost anyone in the helping profession tends to put the needs of others before their own. So many of us working with animals consider this a calling, and may have a tendency to put other people before ourselves, which thus you have a combination of putting other people's needs first in tandem with a stressful work environment. And it's a recipe for compassion fatigue. So the other thing that we need to talk about is the reason we need to talk about it is because compassion fatigue is happening. It's absolutely happening all around us. And so we need to be talking about it more. Unrecognized and untreated compassion fatigue causes people to leave their profession. It's important that we understand this phenomenon for our own well-being, but also for our colleagues and the animals that need our expertise and care. So just some statistics for you. 48 to 85% of helping professionals develop vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and or high rates of traumatic symptoms. It's It's a really high rate. In the US, animal control officers have the highest rate of suicide, and veterinarians in the UK have 4 times higher suicide rate than the general population. Again, if you remember, I had mentioned there's not a whole lot of research and information out there for sanctuaries and rehabilitation facilities. So hence, that's why these are the stats that I'm giving you is based on what the information is that's out there. 81% of workers who suffer from compassion fatigue are women. And the most common symptoms of compassion fatigue are cynicism and emotional exhaustion. So I just, okay, so we need to really understand that there needs to be a balance between compassion fatigue and compassion satisfaction. It's possible for one to have compassion fatigue symptoms and still believe that the work you're doing is the right thing to do and is the field that you want to be in. I just kind of liked this little cartoon. Thought it was cute. Okay, so moving on, we're going to talk about how caretaking for traumatized animals. Oh, I'm waiting for the slide to move. Okay, so we're going to talk about how caretaking for traumatized animals increases your risk of compassion fatigue. So I want to take a moment to talk about trauma and the animals that you're working with before I get back to compassion fatigue. It's vital for us to talk about the trauma and the animals that you're caring for, as this adds complications and stress to your caregiver role and increases your compassion and potentially your fatigue. So it's more culturally conditioned to view animals as inferior or different than us. So this is a large reason why a lot of the animals in your care were once treated as commodities. Now you guys are the ones trying to make their lives better and helping them recover from their trauma and live undisturbed as much as possible. So it's now known that humans and animals share comparable capacities to think, feel, and experience consciousness, as well as sharing a vulnerability for psychological trauma. So specifically for this topic on compassion fatigue, it's important to understand that childhood trauma in both humans and animals has similar outcomes. Okay, so how caretaking for the traumatized animals increases your risk of compassion fatigue. So this brings us to a brief discussion on transspecies psychology, which is the open recognition of the entire body of science, specifically psychology and neuroscience, that acknowledges the similarities between humans and animals. Transspecies psychology is really important as it changes how we view animals from them being different and less than us to just a we and an us category, where it puts humans and animals on a continuum. So, okay, so now we know animals and humans' brains are so similar that we share the same abilities to think and feel and experience trauma just as humans do. So pathology is seen in various animals, both in the wild and in captivity, as I'm sure many of you have seen. So examples of this might be, a chimpanzee who is self-injurious, has night terrors, or alternates between trance-like and highly anxious states. A coyote pup that doesn't understand how to respond to play signals from other coyotes. A bear that sulks and mopes and lacks appetite. Perhaps a parrot that plucks its feathers and has an inability to tolerate stress, or even an elephant that's hypervigilant, hyper-aware essentially, and easily startled by the engine of a car and other loud noises. So this and other un-animal-like behaviors are part of a growing body of research that suggests a radical shift happening that really helps us better understand the animal psyche. Okay, so moving on. Give me just 1 second. Okay, so due to Dr. Gay Bradshaw's research on African elephants, animals are able to be rightfully now diagnosed with PTSD. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, It's a condition that can develop after someone's experienced a traumatic event, like a veteran returning from war. So until a few years ago, diagnosing an animal with PTSD would have been dismissed as anthropomorphism, which is applying human traits to animals. So while only a licensed clinician can diagnose PTSD, you're all dealing with animals on a daily basis that have had difficult past trauma or even are suffering from PTSD. So some examples of things that lead to trauma would be a horse or a cow who's been prematurely weaned, inappropriate living quarters, a chimp subjected to biomedical testing, general lack of medical attention, insufficient food, even a big cat who's been declawed or had its teeth removed. So things of this nature. So these early experiences of abuse and neglect change the brain and greatly impact brain development in both humans and animals, especially where we process emotion in our brain. So again, this is noteworthy for us and for many reasons, because it helps us understand the paradigm shift in how we view animals, better understanding your caretaking role on a day-to-day basis, and the increased risk for compassion fatigue in your industry and caring for animals with trauma histories. Okay, so how many of you talk to your animals? Do the animals talk back? Almost 100% of animal caretakers report that the animals talk back to them. There is definitely a two-way conversation going on, and there is no doubt a relationship that is formed between you and your animals. So the relationship includes the exchange of emotions, empathy, and information between the caregiver, and this is essentially called the human-animal bond. Sorry, there's a delay. I'm working on it.
No, it's okay, Eileen. Don't worry about it. It's totally the system, not your fault.
No, okay. Okay, so I wonder, actually, I want to go back and see if we skipped a slide because I hit the button twice. Here we go. Okay, so when I look into the eyes of an animal, I do not see an animal. I see a living being. I see a friend. I see a soul. Okay, so reasons for compassion fatigue. The human-animal bond, as we just talked about, you having a high level of empathy and putting others' needs first, whether it's the animals you care for, your pets at home, friends, family, your passion for the profession, and then external stressors, government regulations, public perception, lack of understanding, finances, need for grants and fundraising, and then of course, internal stressors. So we're going to spend a little time just reviewing this and the internal stressors. Okay, so staffing, high emotional demands. If your workload is too much, it can lead to expectations that are actually harmful when you can't get everything done. Volume of animals and the level of their needs. We can't forget about euthanasia, grief and loss that you may be experiencing. Hours of operation, limited time off or coverage, finances, relationship with coworkers or board of directors. So I don't know if you guys have seen these, but there's adult coloring books out there now that are supposed to help with stress reduction. Okay, so do you have high risk factors? Think about yourself as we're going through these. Continuous exposure to injured, traumatized, suffering animals. Due to volume of animals, this can lead to unattainable goals, as I had mentioned. Lack of support leads to isolation or bottling up feelings. Caretakers tend to be self-sacrificers, so do you often put others' needs first before their own? Misanthropy, so an excessive dislike of humans as they're the ones to blame for suffering of animals. This can happen in this type of a profession. Another way to understand this is just loving animals more than people. Stress in personal life or at work. So some stress level is good and important, but once you cross a certain threshold, stress then is going to negatively impact your life. And then, of course, if you have a personal history of trauma, you're at a greater risk as well. So Mother Teresa actually understood compassion fatigue pretty well. She wrote in her plan to her supervisors that it was mandatory for her nuns to take an entire year off from their duties every 4 or 5 years to allow them time to heal from their effects of caretaking. Okay, so we are about 25 minutes in, which is going to give us a good time. It's going to give us about 20 to 30 minutes really to talk about now the recovery process. So this, what I'm going to go through, keep in mind that if you're not currently experiencing compassion fatigue, this is still a great, 4 steps to go through for prevention. So you first want to assess your motivation level. What's your motivation level to change? This is going to set you up for realistic goals and making achievable goals for yourself. So even if this means starting out small with 1 coping skill a day or even 1 coping skill a week. The assessment process and the self-reflection process is going to be a bit more in depth. So I'm going to just name off some things that you might want to consider. How do you calm yourself when you're at work? How do you discharge sadness, difficult thoughts while on the job? How are you functioning overall? What are your symptoms you're experiencing? How you're doing with your stress level, coping, support, and work-life balance. Identify the areas that need attention is basically what you want to do in this self-reflection and assessment process. You also want to identify your strengths and knowledge that you have to aid in your recovery process. We all have strengths. And so when we're going through a hard time, it's important to fall back on them. So just a light example might be if you used to have a good workout routine, but you're not really engaged in it right now, you still have this skill set, you're just not utilizing it at the moment. You also want to think about how you've gotten through tough times in the past, what worked, what didn't. And then you'll self-reflect on all of this and also look at how you even got to this place of stress, exhaustion, or compassion fatigue. Transformation, we are going to spend mostly the rest of the webinar talking about this. So, and lastly, with the evaluation piece, you really just want to assess how are you going to recover, as well as in the future keep a good work-life balance that includes coping and self-care. So we are going to talk about these 5 different, I categorize the coping skills into self-compassion, self-awareness, physical relaxation, cognitive and social support, as well as creativity. So I like this little cartoon as well. As you travel life's highway, don't forget to stop and eat the roses. Okay, so self-compassion techniques. Studies show that caregivers who maintain a positive attitude towards life and keep a sense of humor can better balance the stressors that exist when compassion fatigue occurs. So some self-compassion coping techniques to add a sense of humor or play to your life could be actually going out and playing with your animals if you are able to in certain situations, friends, nieces, nephews, perhaps children if you have them, using humor, as well as kind and gentle, realistic self-talk. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a few slides because this bridges from the realistic and kind and gentle self-talk relates to having self-compassion, but also relates to the cognitive coping skills, cognitive meaning thinking, of course, in a few slides. So, but the 2 biggest areas for self-compassion improvement that I see happening on a daily basis is harsh self-judgment. So is one of them. So for example, that might sound like thinking to yourself, that was stupid of me. I should have taken more time to decide. I'm so lazy. I should have gotten here earlier to get everything done. Most of us are harder on ourselves than we are on others. So one great technique to help manage this is to ask yourself, what would I say to my best friend? Or what would I tell my 7-year-old self? Or what would I tell a 7-year-old child? You probably wouldn't tell a 7-year-old child or your 7-year-old self that they're lazy or stupid. Instead, you might say something like, I know you had a hard time waking up this morning, and that's because you probably needed some time to rest. Tonight, let's do something relaxing and get to bed earlier so we can have an easier time waking up and getting to work in the morning. So using the best friend or 7-year-old child technique is a great benchmark that helps decrease the tendency for negative and harsh self-judgment. Secondly, most of us try to stop ourselves from feeling a certain way. So when we experience an unpleasant emotion, we want to do is just get rid of it, right? I mean, it's a natural instinct to just want to get rid of the sadness or the anxiety that you might be experiencing. So for example, with anxiety, we might quietly think to ourselves, oh, here we go again. Why does this happen to me? I wish this would stop. This is awful. But we have emotions for a reason. And so rather than self-judging them and being hard on ourselves and trying to get rid of the emotion, instead, we want to focus on accepting the emotion that we're having because it's there and we can't change it necessarily. And instead reduce the intensity of it. So meaning we want to focus on, rather than trying to change the emotion, like I want to get rid of the anxiety, instead focus on reducing the intensity of the emotion. So if you're feeling really apathetic or really fatigued, again, you'll just want to not focus on trying to get rid of the emotion. You just want to focus on reducing the intensity of it. So meet yourself where you're at and acknowledge the emotion. So rather than, ugh, why is this happening to me? I hate when I have anxiety. Instead, think or even say to yourself and acknowledge the emotion, I'm feeling unsettled and anxious this morning. I get anxious sometimes. It's happened before. It's happening right now, and it will probably happen again in the future. So for today, how can I reduce the intensity of this feeling with coping versus trying to get rid of it? And then that segues yourself into actually using additional coping techniques, which might even be some mindfulness that I will get to in a moment, like just what might make your morning easier, maybe your favorite cup of tea, or taking a moment to sit and watch the animals and enjoy being with them. Okay, so essentially working on noticing your thoughts and then decreasing the self-judgment is one of the more important self-compassion techniques, as well as accepting techniques like accepting your emotions. So if anyone has any questions at this point on those two techniques, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Eileen. We just had one question about asking if personal life stressors increase our risk for compassion fatigue. For example, things that have nothing to do with caring for others, finances, illness, things like that. Does that put somebody at a higher risk for developing compassion?
Yes, that's a good question. And yes, absolutely. So, the example I had given at the beginning of the webinar was I experienced compassion fatigue, but my actual work with caring for clients wasn't what caused the compassion fatigue. Bereavement and grief was in someone I had lost in my family. And that grief then triggered my compassion fatigue, and I no longer had as much empathy and compassion and motivation to help and work with my clients in the same capacity that I had before.
Thank you very much.
Additionally, I think to answer that even further, that actually could also then create burnout as well. So possible to experience compassion fatigue and burnout at the same time. So burnout, if you remember, is about, it starts with having a lot of ambition, and then it basically, burnout is just having too much stress in your work or having too much things to do, not enough time, kind of a situation. And so if you're having things in your personal life that you're having difficulty managing, then you might also perhaps be experiencing burnout and compassion fatigue at the same time. So hopefully that answered the question. Any others?
No, I think we're okay.
Okay, great. We will move on. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about mindfulness, which I had mentioned to you earlier. So we have approximately 70,000 thoughts a day. I don't know how somebody calculates that, but that's what the information says. So we have approximately 70,000 thoughts a day, and most are about the future or the past. So when we think about the future, we tend to experience anxiety, and a lot of times when we think about the past, it tends to trigger sadness or depression. Just to give you guys some just background information. But so nevertheless, we have about 70,000 thoughts a day, and very rarely do we think about the here and now moment. Those very rare moments when we do, some examples might be, taking a breath in and thinking, oh, it's such a beautiful day out, or tasting your coffee and thinking, oh my gosh, this is so good. So we want to increase your mindfulness, especially if you're experiencing burnout, stress, compassion fatigue. I would recommend actually going into your phone and setting an alarm to go off maybe 1 or 2 times a day as a reminder. And when your phone goes off, that's a reminder to shift to the here and now moment. So to shift to the here and now moment, it's really simple. You just want to use your 5 senses, your sight, your smell, your taste, your touch, and your hearing. So you can pick a single object, or you can pick your environment. So I've done this with individuals for practice with using a raisin, even just staring at a raisin and looking at the colors and the shapes and the textures and the smell. Of course, if you're in an environment, you'll focus in on what you're hearing. If you're eating, what you're tasting. Touch might be something like feeling the sun on your skin, the breeze in your hair, or softness perhaps on the cloth or the material of the chair that you're sitting on. So this is a really simple and great way to get centered and be in the here and now moment, which will allow you, if you're in the present here and now moment, it allows you not to be tapping into the things that are necessarily causing sadness or perhaps anxiety, for example. Other things supported by research is a gratitude journal. This is a great way to focus on your compassion satisfaction. Remember, that's the things that got us into the profession in the first place. These are the things that feel really great. So this can be a list, or it can be something more like a journal entry where it's more detailed. If you are feeling fatigued, then I would just recommend the list. Start out small. I would recommend just listing out things that you're grateful for today, or things that you're proud of, or that went well for you. So, why don't we actually all take a moment right now and just practice that, and take a moment to think of 1 to 3 things that you're grateful for today or that went well. And just go ahead and list those out in your head, or if you like to write, you can write them down. This is a really great way, again, to stay mindful and to focus on the compassion satisfaction. Our brains, I won't go into the neurology of it, but our brains are pre-programmed to search and find the negative. It's a evolutionarily survival, essentially, mechanism. If we can find what's wrong and fix it, it increases our chances of survival. So you really need to overcompensate. So for like one negative thing, you might want to list out 5 positive things, just because of the way our brains operate. So the gratitude journal is a great way to manage this. Okay, so control. This is a big one. So focusing on what you have control over versus what you don't have control over. So for example, you don't have control how an animal in your care might be transitioning to your facility, but you can control your thoughts, and you can impact your feelings, and you can control your behaviors. So you can make sure your animal receives proper vet care, attempt to provide nutritious food, talk sweetly to him or her, as well as manage your feelings a bit through coping skills, which does take practice and time. And you can also control your behaviors, like what you ask your facility for support or assistance for you or the animal's needs. So also remember how we talked about caregivers putting others' needs first. So I'd recommend starting to pay attention to when you have trouble saying no to friends or family, or how frequently this happens, when you do things for others because you don't want to hurt their feelings or because you'll feel guilt. So then begin to assess your own needs and prioritize them as being important and valuable, and work on assertiveness and boundary setting with others, which is really important to do if you're going to be able to start to value your needs more. So, I think also working with a professional could be helpful in helping, increase identifying your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors, and kind of working on those. So that's always an option, and things like working with a professional on assertiveness and boundary setting. Lastly, research shows that complaining and venting does nothing for us, even though we all often do it. It just gets us more emotionally activated. So instead, focus on problem solving and more maybe processing your feelings versus venting. Okay, so I want to take just a moment to walk you guys through a breathing exercise. So feel free wherever you're at to go ahead and close your eyes. And I want you to take a deep breath in at your own pace and exhale at your own pace. And I want you to continue to do this over and over again as I walk you through. So as you're breathing, notice any sounds in your environment. And then begin to bring your awareness inwards towards yourself, where you focus on your breathing. Notice the air coming in through your nostrils and going down your esophagus into your lungs and into your stomach. And notice what it feels like to exhale, maybe the temperature change of the air. And continue to focus on this as you breathe in and out at your own pace. If your mind wanders, that's okay. Just come back to your breathing. Now, as you breathe in, you can breathe in happiness, relaxation, calmness, and exhale stress and concerns and worries. And inhale happiness and sunshine and relaxation. And exhale stress and worries or sadness. Now, if you like, you can also decide to choose to breathe in a color, maybe your favorite color, that as you breathe in, it fills your body up. And as you exhale, it moves out of your body. Continue to breathe in and out at your own pace. And maybe take another breath or two. And when you're ready, come back to your room in the webinar. So with breathing exercises, I would really recommend doing them at minimum for 5 minutes, potentially even more, to help you get focused and centered. I did go over, 3 types of breathing exercises you can do. You can just focus on the breath and how it feels. You could literally focus on like inhaling calming things and exhaling the stress. You can envision inhaling colors and visualize it coming into your body and out of your body. So different things are going to work for different people. Meditation, we don't have time to talk about it, but what I will say is you can always go on YouTube and listen to a meditation that will guide you through it. It's always a good option. Progressive muscle relaxation. So when we're stressed or upset, our muscles tend to naturally tighten up and our breath gets shallow. So the progressive muscle relaxation, you are going to isolate different muscles in your body and hold that for about 15 seconds and then release. And then hold it again for 15 seconds and then release. And you'll progressively work your way either from the top of your body down to your feet or reverse from the bottom of your feet up to the top of your head. So if everybody, we'll just start an easy one with your hands. So you'll squeeze your hands right now tightly, don't hurt yourselves, but just enough where you can notice the sensation in your fists are tight. You feel the muscle, notice how tight they are and the tension. And you would hold this for 15 seconds and then let go. And now go ahead and release your hands and notice what the sensation feels like with relaxed muscles. So you'll do this, you'll go through your whole body. You might start with your toes, then move to your calves, your thighs, your abdomen, your glutes, your lungs, your shoulders, biceps, forearms, fists, and even like your jaw and your eyes and your eyebrows. So you'll go through your whole body, and essentially this is going to also fatigue the muscles in your body, which is going to help with relaxation, as well as also, a mindfulness exercise as well. So you could do this at night before you go to bed, or even at work if something's, got you triggered or emotionally upset. Okay, so working out, nutrition, and sleep are very, very important. You can, if you're feeling depressed or fatigued or anxious, I'd recommend just doing a quick internet search for foods that help fight, depression, fatigue, or anxiety, for example. Things that help fight depression, like vitamin C, vitamin E, like things in seeds and nuts, omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants like apricots and all the types of berries and broccoli. These actually help fight depression. So if you're going through a hard time and you're really stressed, I always use a holistic approach with people I'm working with. I'm not just going to work with you on your emotions or your thoughts or your behaviors, but we're going to take a holistic treatment and look at your sleep, your workout routine, nutrition, and things like that. Okay, so next we're going to talk about cognitive and social support, and I will just wait for the slide to shift. So positive self-talk and adjusting expectations. So our expectations really dictate how we respond to things, whether positively or negatively. So, it's honestly best to expect that you're going to get stressed, you're going to get anxious, or you're going to get sad. So for example, it might be best to expect that one thing is going to go wrong each day at work, so that when it does happen, you think, there's that thing that was going to go wrong today. There it is. I see it. Versus, why does this have to happen to me right now? I don't have time for this. So, another option, even for those of you that have really a long list of tasks and have a hard time getting through things every day, to even expect that you may not get through 3 things every day. That way, at the end of the day, you think to yourself, okay, I knew there would be 3 things I wouldn't get done. There they are. And then I'll tack that onto tomorrow's morning list of things to do, versus feeling frustrated and stressed that you didn't get through everything on your list. Positive self-talk. This takes practice. So first, you want to start to try to learn to be aware of your thoughts. So it's really just paying attention to the automatic thoughts that are happening in our brain. I would say maybe for the rest of today, if I can give you guys some homework, might be to just try to notice when you say something harsh or negative to yourself. You'll be surprised how often this happens. So the first step is to increase awareness. And then the second step later would then be to work on changing the negative thoughts to something more compassionate. Lastly, verbal support and expression with a coworker or a friend is really important. Getting support. So remember, no venting. Instead, you want to problem solve or more process the emotional experience you're having versus venting. Again, a professional assistance from a counselor could be a great option for this. But most importantly, that a lot of caretakers tend to not like to ask for help because, well, we're caretakers. So this really does need to change, and really working on stepping outside of your comfort zone to ask for support and help when you need it. Okay, so creativity. This is an interesting one that you might think for me to put in to this as far as coping and recovering from compassion fatigue. But there's a lot of research out there on the benefits of creativity. And it really, I think, goes back to the way our brains are wired. But, it's been found that creativity positively associates with joy and love, and negatively is associated with anger, fear, and anxiety. So research shows engaging in such creative expression, such as dance, drama, art, music, photography, really helps to promote neuroplasticity. And this is the brain's capacity to change and adapt. So it refers to the physiological changes in the brain that happen as the result of our interactions with our environment and chronic stress. So even chronic stress impacts our brain. So neuroplasticity helps recovery from trauma. Okay, so I want to give you guys some additional resources because, of course, this is just a starting off point. For those interested, the Carrillo Center has a specialized curriculum for sanctuary professionals. They're self-paced and online, so anyone in the world can utilize these. There's creating home sanctuary and then caring for the caregiver. Brene Brown is a wonderful researcher and author, and she talks a lot about vulnerability, a ton about happiness, and a little bit about creativity. She's really fun to listen to and tells really good stories. She also has books that are very easy to read. If you need to find a therapist, psychologytoday.com is available. I'm not sure if you're in Nigeria or India, this will be a helpful resource for you, for example. But two others that might be would be Animal Activism, Activist Online Support Group, and Compassion Fatigue in a Facebook group for animal shelter and rescue workers. So these are two online options for you. Some books, since you guys are going to get these slides emailed to you, I won't kind of read through these. I will just speak to on the right side at the bottom. There is an assessment tool for compassion fatigue. So if you want to take that, or maybe have people in your organization take that, so you guys can see where everybody's at and assess. So that pretty much sums up I'll go back and leave this on the resource page. And if anybody, then we can open up the discussion for some Q&A if you guys have some things you want to have me elaborate on, clarify, or if you guys have fresh questions you want to throw at me.
Okay, thank you so much, Eileen. I'll give everybody a minute to put in their questions. I know we've got one, but I want to mention something really important that I forgot to mention at the beginning, especially after listening to your presentation, which was amazing. Eileen is actually going to be doing 2 more webinars for us. So watch for something coming up in July and another one coming up in August. So I think I'm sure everybody enjoyed the session as much as I did, and I know Kelly's going to have closing remarks also. But a question that's come through and one more comment I wanted to make. Erica from NAPSA has asked me to let everybody know too that a recording of this will be available as part of NAPSA's virtual workshop that opens on June 15th. So it will be available there also, which is great. And let me give you the first question that we've got. Yeah. What do you recommend we do if we see signs of CF in a coworker?
Yeah, so, well, first, I guess I would recommend just being really authentic and honest. You guys are probably going to experience this. If this is the career that you're going to be in, you're probably going to either watch yourself experiencing it or see friends or coworkers experiencing it. So I think the best thing that you could really do is just be authentic and honest and check in with them and see how they're doing, or see if there's any, what's causing them to feel the way that they're feeling. Not, like I said, not everybody's open to receiving help, especially us being caregivers. We like to help and be strong and not necessarily receive the help. So I think the best thing you could do is probably go to the person and check in with them, and then probably ask them for them to even take some time to think about what they might need to feel better, or for you to help. I think a lot of times when we go to ask people, how can we help you? People don't always have an answer for that. So if someone doesn't have an answer for that, I would probably ask them, why don't you take some time to think about what's weighing you down, what's impacting you, and even hypothesize about what might make you feel just even a little bit better. Again, it's not about getting rid of the emotion, because that's not realistic. It's about how do you reduce it. So I usually talk about things on a scale of like 0 to 10, 10 being the worst. If you're feeling something at an 8, even if you can get the intensity of that feeling down to a 7, it gives you some reprieve. So I guess ultimately, I think you do need to talk with the colleague, and hopefully they're open to it. And if they're not, all you can do is let them know that if and when they're ready, that you're there. Now, if you're a manager, I don't know how many of your organizations have HRs, or if you're a manager, this might be more of an issue if someone's not doing their job the way that they should be. And then that probably gets into more upper management and how upper management chooses to handle those types of situations.
Thank you so much. And we had somebody ask if I could put the link back up for the test, which I did. So hopefully everybody's seen that. We had 2 people ask pretty much the same question. What would be the difference between CF and clinical depression?
Sure. Okay. Before I answer that, I just want to say with the assessment tool, it is out in, I think, 27 languages. So for anyone over the world, if you go to that link, you can find the English version and any other language as well. So okay, so the difference between compassion fatigue and depression, they are going to look similar in terms of the symptoms, 100%. Clinically, to diagnose depression, somebody has to have symptoms for 2 weeks or longer, where compassion fatigue, we're looking at more, so let me reframe. The symptoms are going to look similar, but how the symptoms come about is what's going to be different. So the compassion fatigue is really coming from caretaking for others that are traumatized or suffering. So a clinician like myself would really look at what's causing the symptoms to differentiate between, is this clinical depression or is this compassion fatigue? But I do believe compassion fatigue can lead to depression, right? Because the symptoms are similar. So, one of the symptoms for compassion fatigue, which, is like a loss of identity. I mean, that's big. That's not going to get fixed just over, shifting your tasks and duties at work, for example. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. I do want to mention we had somebody say that the breathing technique you showed us really did help them. She said she actually felt her feet relax. A very strange but good feeling. So.
I'm so glad to hear that. And honestly, that was such a short exercise. So for those that were feeling like it didn't work for you, it was a very short exercise. And I think a lot of people get frustrated sometimes because their thoughts get in the way. So when you're practicing mindfulness and breathing techniques, it's not about quieting your mind. It's more about when your mind wanders, can you come back to the breathing or the mindfulness exercise? So thank you. I'm so glad to hear that it was helpful.
Great, thank you. And I want to say, I think I've got all the questions. If I didn't, everybody, please feel free to type that in the chat. I will be sending out a copy of the slides, a PDF of the slides, as well as the recording link once that's ready. I want to say before I pass this over to Kelly, a huge, huge thank you to Eileen. It was a tremendous presentation, and I keep going through my mind all these people that I want to make sure that I pass it along to. So thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it over to Kelly for some closing remarks.
Can everybody hear me? I unmuted myself, so I should be fine.
Yep, you're good. Okay,
great. So yeah, no, that was a great starting place. And as Robin mentioned just a little bit ago, this is one in a 3-part series. So Eileen will kind of continue to guide us through some additional topics that focus on self-care, especially with the perspective of the caregiver, and continue to help us in our mental health while we try to help the animals that we care for. And this was all inspired by a collaborative relationship with North American Primate Sanctuary Alliance. So I wanted to thank Erica for coming to GFAS with an idea to celebrate caregivers, and we're appreciative of being a partner for this day, as Robin again mentioned at the beginning. So I just wanted to kind of draw attention again that technically Friday is this so-called holiday that we've invented. So, if your organizations are taking it upon themselves to actually do something special for the caregivers at your sanctuaries, let us know. You can either email Robin at sanctuaryfederation.org, or me at Kelly, Kellie, at sanctuaryfederation.org. And what we're trying to do on Friday is just, recognize all the sanctuaries that are recognizing their caregivers that day. So kind of, hopefully there's going to be a lot of you. So, we might not be able to highlight all the specific examples of what you're doing, but, we'd certainly love to list all the groups that are going to be doing something. And it doesn't have to be something huge. It could be just like you guys are going to have a potluck, or, take a minute to even talk about some of the things that you're grateful for, like Eileen mentioned. But, whatever way that you think that you're might celebrate, just letting us know that you're going to do something that would be really great and appreciated. So again, just thanks again to Eileen. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think our plan is to try to bring one of these webinars to you once a month for the next couple months. Or maybe it was every 6 weeks, but we'll keep everyone who was attending and registered today in the loop on when the next one will be. And, again, we'll make these recorded available. The first one will be part of NAPSA's virtual workshop, and then on Beyond GFAS's website. But we'll continue to bring these opportunities. And again, thanks for everybody for attending. And this was one of our most popular webinars that we've had. So obviously this is an important topic to you, and we're really excited to be a part of it. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Kelly. And thank you again, Eileen, so much. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And I guess I will go ahead and leave it at that and close down the webinar. I hope everybody has a great day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.